A first-class ticket, a glass of champagne, a simple request. That's all it took for flight attendant Jessica Miller to shatter a passenger's journey and, unknowingly, her own entire future. On a transatlantic flight from New York to London, she decided a black woman in seat 2A didn't belong, that she was somehow unworthy of the same service as everyone else in the cabin. Jessica saw a quiet woman in a simple tracksuit. What she failed to see was the formidable billionaire who had signed her very own paychecks. This isn't just a story about poor customer service. It's a story about what happens when prejudice at 35,000 feet meets the cold, hard reality of consequence on the ground. The first-class cabin of Aura Wing Airline's flight, AW73, from JFK to London was an oasis of curated calm. The scent of lavender and chamomile hung faintly in the air, a signature fragrance designed to soothe the anxieties of transcontinental travel. Passengers settled into their aura pods, private cocoons of cream leather and polished burled wood, accepting flutes of Bollinger from immaculately dressed flight attendants. In seat 2A sat Serafina Hayes. To the casual observer, she was the most unremarkable passenger in the cabin. While others wore tailored business suits or designer leisure wear, she was dressed in a simple, well-made, but unbranded charcoal grey tracksuit. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face was free of makeup. She wasn't scrolling on a new model phone or tapping away on a laptop. Instead, she was reading a well-worn paperback novel, its spine creased with affection. This anonymity was intentional. For the past 6 months, Serafina Hayes had been the sole silent owner of Aura Wing Airlines. She had acquired the struggling carrier through a private equity firm. She controlled Sterling Vance Capital with a singular vision to make it the most customer-centric airline in the world. She believed that true luxury wasn't in the vintage of the champagne, but in the dignity and respect afforded to every single person who stepped onto her planes. And she knew with the certainty of a woman who had built an empire from nothing that you couldn't learn the truth about your company from a boardroom. You had to experience it yourself. Flight attendant Jessica Miller moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost brittle grace. She had been with the airline for 8 years long before the Sterling Vance acquisition. She saw herself as a gatekeeper of the first-class experience. Her smiles were reserved for the passengers she deemed worthy, the ones in Rolexes, the ones who spoke with an air of inherited authority, the ones who looked the part. Her eyes scanned the cabin, and her gaze snagged on Serafina in 2A. Jessica's perfectly sculpted smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. Another one, she thought, a familiar flicker of annoyance kindling within her. Probably used all her points for a one-time upgrade. Doesn't know the first thing about etiquette. She served the man in 1A, a hearty German businessman refilling his champagne with a warm, "Of course, Mr. Schmidt." She offered a pre-departure selection of warm nuts to the actress in 3C, engaging in a brief, hushed conversation about her latest film. She moved with practiced ease, her service a dance of exclusion and inclusion. And in this dance, Serafina Hayes was being deliberately left out. Serafina noticed. She was a woman who noticed everything. She noticed the way Jessica's body language shifted, her shoulders stiffening slightly as she approached her row. She noticed how Jessica served the man across the aisle in 2B before her, despite having passed her seat first. When Jessica finally turned to her, the warm smile she'd given Mr. Schmidt was gone, replaced by a cool, impersonal mask. "Can I get you something before takeoff?" Jessica's voice was clipped, lacking the warmth she had offered others. "I'd love a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lime, please." Serafina replied, her voice soft but clear. Jessica nodded curtly and turned away without another word. Minutes passed. The final passengers boarded. The cabin doors were being prepared for closure. Mr. Schmidt had received a second glass of champagne. The woman in 3C had been given a magazine. The man in 2B was enjoying his orange juice. Serafina's seat remained empty of a drink. She didn't flag Jessica down. She simply waited, observing. This was data. This was the unvarnished truth of her airline. She watched as Jessica moved back up the aisle, her eyes deliberately avoiding seat 2A. It wasn't an oversight. It was an act of pointed neglect. Finally, as the captain's voice came over the intercom to announce their imminent departure, Serafina pressed the call button. The light pinged softly above her head. Jessica appeared moments later, her expression one of pure irritation. "Yes." "I was just wondering about that sparkling water," Serafina said, her tone perfectly even. Jessica let out an audible put-upon sigh. "I'll have to get it after we're in the air. We are preparing for takeoff now." She spoke slowly, as if to a child. "I understand," Serafina said, "but you served several other passengers their pre-departure drinks after I made my request. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't been forgotten." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, the pre-departure service is now over. You will have to wait." She didn't wait for a response, turning on her heel and marching back to the galley, her back ramrod straight. Across the aisle, a man in a crisp suit, a Mr. David Chen, who had been observing the interaction, caught Serafina's eye and gave her a small, sympathetic frown. Serafina offered him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The plane began its slow taxi to the runway. Serafina opened her book, but she wasn't reading the words. She was replaying the last 10 minutes in her mind, not with anger, but with a chilling, crystalline clarity. The problem was worse than she thought. Once the plane reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the familiar hum of the engines became a backdrop for the drama unfolding in the first-class cabin. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and Jessica Miller and her colleague, a kind-faced junior flight attendant named Michael, began the dinner service. Michael approached Serafina first. "Ma'am, my apologies for the delay earlier. Can I get you that sparkling water now, and perhaps some champagne to start?" His smile was genuine, his tone respectful. "The water would be wonderful, thank you, Michael," Serafina said, making a mental note of his name and his professionalism. "I'll pass on the champagne for now." He returned moments later with the water served in a heavy crystal glass with a perfectly cut slice of lime perched on the rim. "Mr. Vance insists the beluga caviar is particularly good on this flight, if you're so inclined," he offered. Serafina smiled. "Mr. Vance has excellent taste." It was a private joke. Robert Vance was her hand-picked CEO. He reported directly to her. Just as Michael was about to take her meal order, Jessica swept in her presence, immediately changing the atmosphere. "I'll handle this, Michael. Go check on Mrs. Albright in 4D. Michael, sensing the tension, but not wanting to challenge a senior colleague, gave Serafina a quick apologetic glance and retreated. Jessica stood over Serafina, her notepad in hand, her pen tapping impatiently. "Your choice for dinner." "I'll have the seared salmon, please," Serafina said. Jessica scribbled it down. "And to drink." "I'll just stick with the water for now, thank you." "Fine," Jessica snapped, before turning to the man across the aisle, Mr. Chen. Her entire demeanor transformed. A dazzling smile appeared. "Mr. Chen, so lovely to see you flying with us again. The usual Chateau Margaux with your filet mignon." Mr. Chen, a man of quiet integrity, felt a prickle of discomfort. "The filet sounds wonderful, Jessica." "Thank you." He deliberately avoided his usual wine order, feeling it was somehow complicit in the blatant disparity of service. The meal service continued this pattern. Serafina's salmon was placed on her table with a clatter, while Mr. Chen's steak was presented with a flourish. Her water glass remained empty for long stretches, while the passengers Jessica favored had their wine glasses refilled before they were even half empty. Serafina ate in silence, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. This was no longer about a rude employee. This was a systemic failure. Jessica felt empowered to act this way. She felt safe. That meant the culture, the one Serafina had poured hundreds of millions of dollars into changing, was still rotten at its core. The breaking point came after dinner. Serafina, feeling a chill from the air conditioning, noticed the other passengers had been offered blankets and pajamas. She had received neither. She pressed the call button again. Jessica appeared after a long delay. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I was wondering if I might have a blanket." "It's a bit cold," Serafina requested politely. Jessica's eyes swept over Serafina's simple tracksuit, a sneer twisting her lips. "We only have a limited number of amenity kits and blankets for our first-class passengers," she said, her implication clear. "You are not truly one of us." "They have all been distributed." This was a bald-faced lie. Serafina could see at least 3 unused plastic-wrapped blanket sets in the overhead compartment, just a few feet away. "I can see some right there," Serafina said, pointing calmly. Jessica's face flushed with anger. She was being challenged. "Those are reserved," she lied again, her voice rising. "Ma'am, I don't know how you managed to get a seat in this cabin, but you need to understand that there are protocols. You can't just demand things." The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. How you managed to get a seat in this cabin? It was no longer about a blanket. It was about her presence, her skin color, her perceived status. Before Serafina could respond, David Chen from across the aisle spoke up, his voice firm. "Excuse me, that's an outrageous thing to say. There are blankets right there. Just give the lady a blanket." Jessica whirled on him. "Sir, with all due respect, this is an operational matter. Please stay out of it. It's a customer service matter, and your service is appalling," Mr. Chen retorted, his face set with indignation. "I am a Platinum Elite member with this airline, and I have never seen such unprofessional and frankly discriminatory behavior." Jessica, now cornered, decided to go on the offensive. She leaned down toward Serafina, her voice, a low, venomous hiss, meant only for her. "Listen to me. You are causing a disturbance. If you continue to harass me and disrupt this cabin, I will have the captain radio ahead, and you will be met by security upon landing in London. Do you understand me?" Serafina looked directly into Jessica's furious eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, only a profound, weighty disappointment. All the fight went out of her, replaced by a cold resolve. She would not engage further. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. "I understand perfectly," Serafina said, her voice quiet but resonant. Jessica, taking her quietness as submission, smirked triumphantly. She straightened up, shot a venomous glare at Mr. Chen, and walked away. Serafina leaned her head back against the soft leather, the chill in the cabin now seeping deep into her bones. She didn't need a blanket anymore. The icy resolve flowing through her veins was more than enough to keep her warm for the rest of the flight. She now knew exactly what she had to do. The moment they landed, the audit of Aura Wing Airlines would begin, and it would start with Jessica Miller. The remainder of the flight passed in a thick, uncomfortable silence. Michael, the junior flight attendant, approached Serafina's seat twice, his eyes full of concern, silently refilling her water and offering a selection of teas. He knew he couldn't openly defy his senior colleague, but his small acts of kindness were a beacon in the hostile environment Jessica had created. Serafina made sure to thank him warmly by name each time. Jessica, meanwhile, radiated a smug sense of victory. She flitted about the cabin, laughing with favored passengers, pointedly ignoring both Serafina and David Chen. In her mind, she had successfully put an imposter in her place and quelled a disruption. She felt powerful, in control. As the plane began its descent into Heathrow, a sense of finality settled over Serafina. She hadn't slept. She had spent the last few hours meticulously documenting every interaction, every slight, every word in a small, leather-bound notebook she always carried. She noted the time of each event, the specific phrasing Jessica used, and the reactions of other passengers and crew. It was no longer a personal affront. It was evidence. Upon landing, as the passengers began to stir and gather their belongings, Serafina remained seated. She waited until the cabin had nearly cleared. David Chen paused by her seat on his way out. "I'm truly sorry you had to experience that," he said in a low voice. "It was unacceptable. If you decide to file a formal complaint, please know that I would be more than willing to provide a statement. Here's my card." He handed her a business card, David Chen, Senior Partner, Omnicap Financial. Serafina took the card, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your integrity is a credit to this airline, even if some of its employees are not. I may well take you up on that." He nodded and proceeded down the jet bridge. Finally, Serafina stood up. As she passed the galley, Jessica and Michael were tidying up. Michael met her gaze and offered a small, sincere smile. "Have a safe onward journey, Mom." "Thank you, Michael. You were wonderful," Serafina said, making sure Jessica could hear. Jessica refused to even look at her busying herself with a coffee pot, her back stiff with contempt. The silent dismissal was her final act of disrespect. Serafina walked off the plane, not into the general terminal, but was immediately met by a discreet airport official who escorted her to a private diplomatic lounge reserved for high-level executives and dignitaries. Inside the hushed, opulent room, she finally allowed the mask of calm to drop. A wave of exhaustion and anger washed over her. It was one thing to read reports about inconsistent service. It was another to be on the receiving end of such targeted, racially tinged venom on one of her own aircraft. She took out her personal phone, not the one she used for day-to-day business, but a satellite-encrypted device reserved for a handful of contacts. She scrolled to a single name, Robert Vance. It was just after 2:00 a.m. in New York, but she didn't hesitate. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. "Sarah, is everything all right?" "Robert," she said, her voice low and devoid of emotion. "We have a problem, a significant one." There was a rustling on the other end of the line as Vance likely sat bolt upright in bed. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. The company, however, is not. I've just landed at Heathrow on AW712. She proceeded to give him a calm, concise, and utterly damning account of her 6-hour journey. She relayed Jessica Miller's words, her actions, the refusal of water, the lie about the blanket, the public humiliation, and the threat of security. She mentioned David Chen by name and his offer to be a witness. She commended the professionalism of Michael. She left out no detail. On the other end of the line, Robert Vance was silent, but Serafina could practically feel the temperature in New York dropping. Vance was a formidable CEO, a man she had chosen for his ruthless efficiency and his unwavering loyalty to her vision. He understood exactly what this meant. This wasn't a customer complaint. This was a direct assault on the foundation of the new Aura Wing. "Her name is Jessica Miller," Vance said, his voice now dangerously quiet. I will have her entire file on my desk before the New York office opens in 4 hours. I will also have the full crew manifest the passenger list and any and all past service records or complaints linked to her name. Good, Serafina said. I also want you to contact Mr. David Chen. Treat him like gold. He stood up when no one else would. Consider it done. What are your orders for Miller? Serafina paused, looking out the lounge window at the Aura Wing plane parked on the tarmac, its elegant logo glinting under the airport lights. For now, nothing. Let her finish her layover. Let her fly back. I don't want her to have any inkling of what's coming. I want her to walk into headquarters thinking she's untouchable. The meeting will take place the day after she lands back in New York. I want you there, Robert. And I want Carol Shaw from HR. And book a seat for me on the next flight to New York. I'll be there too. A beat of silence. Vance knew what her presence meant. She wasn't just delegating. She was going to be the arbiter of this verdict herself. She won't know what hit her. Vance promised, a grim finality in his tone. Oh, she will, Robert. Serafina replied, her voice as cold and clear as the stratosphere. She will know exactly what hit her. And so will the rest of the company. The New York headquarters of Aura Wing Airlines, a sleek glass tower in Long Island City, buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy. But on the 50th floor in the executive wing, the atmosphere was frigid. CEO Robert Vance had arrived at 5:00 a.m., a black thundercloud of a man. His executive assistant, a woman known for her unflappable demeanor, took one look at his face and silently cancelled his first 3 meetings of the day. By 6:00 a.m., he was in a secure conference room with Carol Shaw, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources. Carol was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had seen it all. On the polished mahogany table between them lay a single thick file, Miller Jessica, Employee ID 74B39. I read your summary, Carol said, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. And I've read the full preliminary report. It's bad, Robert. Worse than bad. Walk me through it, Vance commanded, his voice a low growl. Jessica Miller, 8 years with the Airline, 4 as a senior flight attendant. Her performance reviews are consistently inconsistent. She receives glowing marks from her direct supervisors who praise her efficiency and adherence to protocol. But there's a shadow file. She pushed a smaller folder across the table. Over the past 3 years, we've had 7 informal customer complaints logged against her. They never rose to the level of a formal inquiry, but the pattern is undeniable. Vance opened the folder. The complaints were from a diverse range of passengers, but a theme quickly emerged. A black musician who felt he was repeatedly ignored in business class. A Latino family on a group upgrade who were told their children were being too loud, while other children were not reprimanded. An Indian software executive who complained that Miller had spoken to him in a grossly condescending manner. In every case, when confronted by a supervisor, Jessica had claimed the passenger was being difficult or unreasonable, and with no other witnesses, the complaints were filed away with a minor note. She's been hiding in plain sight, Vance seethed, slamming the folder shut. Targeting people she thinks won't make a fuss or won't be believed. She got comfortable. And arrogant, Carol added. To do this in first class with multiple witnesses, she felt untouchable. Vance's phone buzzed. It was a text from his contact at Omnicap Financial. Mr. Chen has been reached. He is incandescent with rage about the incident and has already provided a detailed notarized statement. He says, and I quote, "It was the most blatant display of racial prejudice I have ever witnessed in a service environment." He also sends his profound respects to the woman in 2A for her superhuman composure. Vance showed the text to Carol. She shook her head slowly. She threatened a passenger. She lied to another. She discriminated against a third, who just so happens to own the entire company. This isn't a simple termination, Robert. This is a 5-alarm fire for our brand. Which is why we are going to handle it with surgical precision, Vance said, his mind already formulating a plan. Ms. Hayes is flying in tonight. She will be at the meeting. Jessica Miller's return flight, AW713, lands tomorrow afternoon. She's scheduled for 2 days off. Her summons will be for Thursday morning, 9:00 a.m. sharp. What will the summons say? Carol asked. Keep it vague but official. Mandatory debriefing regarding flight AW72. Presence required. 50th floor boardroom. Let her think it's about Mr. Chen's complaint. Let her spend the next 2 days polishing her story, perfecting her lies. Let her walk in here convinced she's the victim. Carol nodded, understanding the strategy. They needed to give her enough rope. I've also pulled the file on the other attendant, Michael. Vance continued sliding another much thinner file across the table. Michael Petrov, 3 years with us. Impeccable record. Multiple commendations from passengers. He's been nominated for the Aura Wing Ambassador Award twice, but has been passed over for more senior staff. Like Jessica Miller. Carol finished his thought, a grim irony in her voice. Exactly, Vance confirmed. After we deal with Miller, we're going to deal with him. For the next 48 hours, the 50th floor operated with a quiet, focused intensity. Vance's team secured sworn statements from 2 other first-class passengers who had noticed the tension. They queued up the internal security footage from the JFK boarding gate, which showed Jessica's dismissive body language toward Serafina from the very beginning. They prepared a full financial impact report on how a discrimination lawsuit could affect their stock prices and brand partnerships. By Wednesday evening, the case was airtight. A thick binder full of evidence sat at the head of the boardroom table. Serafina Hayes had landed and was now resting at her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, ready for the reckoning to come. Meanwhile, in a suburban New Jersey apartment, Jessica Miller was boasting to her roommate. "You won't believe the passenger I had to deal with on the London trip," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Some woman in first, dressed like she was going to the gym, caused a huge scene over a blanket I had to threaten her with security. Honestly, some people have no class." Her roommate nodded sympathetically. "What a nightmare." "I know, right," Jessica said with a laugh. "But I handled it. The purser even thanked me for my firm management of the situation. I wouldn't be surprised if I get a commendation for it." She checked her work email and saw the notification for the meeting. "Speak of the devil," she said, a smug smile spreading across her face. "Called into a debriefing at HQ on Thursday. Probably want to hear my side of the story to close the file. Might even get a bonus out of it." She went to bed that night, sleeping the sound, untroubled sleep of the truly self-righteous, completely unaware that she wasn't just heading to a meeting. She was heading to her own corporate execution. Thursday morning arrived, crisp and clear. Jessica Miller took extra time getting ready. She chose her sharpest suit, a navy blue number that she felt made her look authoritative and professional. She styled her hair perfectly and applied her makeup with precision. This wasn't just a meeting. In her mind, it was a performance. A performance of the competent, poised senior flight attendant who had expertly handled a difficult situation. She hummed to herself during her commute into the city, mentally rehearsing her story. She would paint the passenger in 2A as unstable and demanding from the start. She'd claim the woman had become aggressive, forcing her to take a firm stance to protect the peace of the cabin. She would embellish Mr. Chen's role, framing him as an interfering busybody who didn't understand the full context. It was her word, the word of a trusted 8-year employee against some random disgruntled passenger. She had no doubt who they would believe. Walking into the Aura Wing headquarters, she felt a familiar swell of pride. The soaring atrium, the polished marble floors, the giant glowing Aura Wing logo. This was her world. She belonged here. She checked in with security, and her confidence grew when the guard greeted her with a respectful, "Good morning, Miss Miller. They're expecting you on the 50th floor." The elevator ride was silent and swift. As she ascended, she felt a thrill of anticipation. The 50th floor was executive country. She'd only been up here once before for a group award ceremony years ago. This felt different, more important. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was immediately different from the bustling floors below. It was deeply, unnervingly quiet. Plush grey carpeting absorbed every sound. The air was cool and still. A stern-looking executive assistant met her at the reception desk. "Ms. Miller, Mr. Vance and Miss Shaw are waiting for you in boardroom C. This way, please." Mr. Vance. The CEO. A flicker of surprise, quickly followed by a rush of ego. The CEO himself was involved in this debriefing. This was even bigger than she thought. Her commendation was practically guaranteed. The assistant led her down a long, art-lined corridor. Each step on the thick carpet felt heavy, deliberate. They arrived at a pair of imposing double doors made of frosted glass and dark wood. The assistant opened one of the doors and gestured for her to enter. "Jessica Miller, ma'am," she announced into the room. Jessica stepped inside, her rehearsed smile fixed on her face. The smile faltered instantly. The boardroom was vast and intimidating. A colossal mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by 24 empty leather chairs. At the far end of the table, sitting side by side, were CEO Robert Vance and HR head Carol Shaw. Their faces were like stone, completely unreadable. The space between her and them felt like a mile. But it was the third person in the room that made the air leave her lungs. Sitting in a chair slightly away from the table, positioned so she had a clear view of the proceedings, was the woman from seat 2A. She was no longer wearing a simple tracksuit. Today she was dressed in an impeccably tailored deep purple power suit that radiated quiet authority. Her hair was styled elegantly, and her eyes, which Jessica had mistaken for meek, now held a penetrating, analytical intensity. She looked calm, poised, and powerful. She looked like she owned the very air in the room. Jessica froze in the doorway, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. 1,000 panicked questions ricocheted through her brain. What is she doing here? Did they fly her in to confront me? How did she get a meeting with the CEO? This can't be happening. "Ms. Miller, please come in. Close the door and have a seat." Robert Vance said, his voice a low baritone that allowed for no argument. He gestured to the single lonely chair placed directly opposite them at the table. Jessica's feet felt like lead as she walked across the room. The confident stride she had entered the building with was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. The room was silent except for the sound of her own frantic heartbeat pounding in her ears. She sat down, her hands clammy, her rehearsed speech completely forgotten. She stared at the woman from the flight, then at Vance and Shaw. Her confusion was morphing into a dawning, sickening dread. This was not a debriefing. This was not a commendation. This was an ambush. Carol Shaw slid a glass of water towards her. "Thank you for coming in, Jessica. We have some serious matters to discuss regarding your conduct on flight AW712 on September 25th. Jessica swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She looked at the woman from 2A, who simply watched her, her expression unchanging. The power dynamic had been inverted so completely, so suddenly, that Jessica felt a wave of vertigo. The woman she had dismissed, insulted and threatened, was now sitting in judgment of her flanked by the two most powerful people in the company. The trap had been sprung, and she had just walked right into it. "Let's begin," Robert Vance said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. He opened the large binder in front of him. "Ms. Miller, we received a formal complaint regarding an incident on your recent flight to London. A very serious one. But before we review that, we'd like to hear your account of the service you provided in the first-class cabin, specifically your interactions with the passenger in seat 2A. This was it. Jessica's chance to control the narrative. The sight of the woman rattled her, but her survival instincts kicked in. She would stick to the story. She was the victim here. "Of course, Mr. Vance," she began, her voice a little shakier than she wanted. The passenger in 2A. She was problematic from the moment she boarded. She was immediately demanding, very aggressive in her tone. I did my best to de-escalate, but she was insistent, causing discomfort to those around her. Carol Shaw raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. "What was her initial demanding request, Jessica?" "She wanted a drink just as we were about to take off. I explained it was against protocol for safety, but she became very agitated." Jessica was warming up now, the lies coming more easily. It set the tone for the entire flight. She complained about the food, the temperature. Nothing was good enough. Vance nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "And the incident with the blanket, that was the worst of it," Jessica said, feigning exasperation. "She demanded a blanket, and when I told her they had all been distributed, she became irate. She started yelling. She pointed to blankets that were reserved for our Platinum Elite members on request. I was simply following procedure. Another passenger, a Mr. Chen, got involved and only made things worse. I was concerned for the safety and comfort of the entire cabin. I felt I had no choice but to warn her that if her disruptive behavior continued, she would be met by security. I was protecting the airline's interest." She finished her account, her heart pounding. She thought she'd done well. She sounded convincing, professional. She glanced at the woman from 2A, expecting to see her flustered or angry. Instead, the woman just looked at her with a kind of clinical pity. Robert Vance listened to her entire fabrication without interruption. When she was done, he let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before he spoke. "Thank you, Ms. Miller. That is a very detailed account, and a complete fabrication from start to finish." His voice was flat, devoid of anger, which made the words all the more devastating. I don't know what you mean," Jessica stammered. "Let me be specific," Carol Shaw interjected, taking over. She slid a document across the table. It was a signed and notarized statement. "This is from Mr. David Chen, a passenger you identified. He is one of our most loyal customers. His account describes your behavior as unprovoked, unprofessional, and discriminatory. He states that the passenger in 2A was unfailingly polite, and that you were the sole source of aggression." Jessica's face paled. "He's mistaken. He didn't see everything. We also have statements from 2 other passengers." Vance continued, his voice like ice. "A Mrs. Albright and a Mr. Peterson. Both corroborate Mr. Chen's version of events. Both describe your service towards the passenger in 2A as hostile and deliberately neglectful." He then turned on a large screen on the wall. It showed the JFK gate footage. There was Serafina boarding, and there was Jessica turning her back on her, her disdain visible even without audio. And then, Carol said, her voice softening slightly, as if she were a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. There is the matter of what you said to her. Your lie about the blankets. The specific phrase you used, "I don't know how you managed to get a seat in this cabin." And your threat? Jessica was shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, she's twisting my words. She's lying. Why are you believing her, a random passenger over me? An 8-year employee. It was her last desperate gambit, an appeal to loyalty. Robert Vance leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. That is an excellent question, Ms. Miller. Why are we believing her? Perhaps because her complaint carries a certain weight. He paused, letting the tension build to an unbearable peak. Jessica looked from Vance to Carol, and finally to the silent woman who was the cause of her world collapsing. The woman still hadn't spoken a single word. "Jessica," Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I think it's time for a proper introduction. You've been so concerned with who belongs in first class. I'd like you to meet the person who owns it, and the plane it's in, and the seat you're sitting in, and the desk I'm sitting at." He gestured with an open hand toward the woman. "Ms. Miller, allow me to introduce your employer, the sole owner of Aura Wing Airlines, and chairwoman of Sterling Vance Capital, Ms. Serafina Hayes." The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. Sterling Vance, the name on the new corporate letterhead, the name of the firm that had bought the airline. Hayes. She had heard whispers of a mysterious, reclusive new owner. It couldn't be. Jessica's eyes darted to the woman, to Ms. Hayes, the simple tracksuit, the quiet demeanor, the paperback book. It was an act, a test, a trap. Her mind replayed every single interaction on the flight, every sneer, every clipped word, every dismissive gesture. But now she saw it all through a lens of pure gut-wrenching horror. She hadn't been putting an imposter in her place. She had been abusing the Empress in disguise. The blood drained from her face. The room began to spin. The carefully constructed world of her own self-importance and prejudice didn't just crack. It vaporized in an instant. All that was left was the sickening, vertiginous free fall of realization. She looked at Serafina Hayes, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet strength, the unwavering composure, the eyes that weren't meek but were wise with a power Jessica couldn't possibly comprehend. And for the first time since the ordeal began, Serafina Hayes spoke. Her voice was not angry or triumphant. It was quiet, filled with a profound and unshakable disappointment. "It was never about the water, Jessica, or the blanket. It was about dignity, and you failed that test." The silence that followed Serafina's words was absolute. For Jessica Miller, it was the sound of her life breaking in two. The before, when she was a senior flight attendant, with a promising career and a sense of superiority. And the after, which was this terrifying, bottomless moment. Ms. Hayes, I am so sorry." She stammered the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. "I didn't know. If I had known who you were—" Serafina held up a hand, a simple, elegant gesture that stopped her cold. "That is the entire problem, Jessica," she said, her voice still calm, but now edged with steel. "It should not matter who I was, whether I was the owner of this airline or a teacher from Ohio who saved up for 5 years for that seat. My humanity and my right to be treated with basic decency should have been the same. You were not serving a ticket. You were serving a person. And you decided based on nothing but your own prejudice that I was a person of lesser value." Carol Shaw slid a final set of papers and an envelope across the table. "Jessica, your employment with Aura Wing Airlines is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. This includes violation of our anti-discrimination policies harassment of a passenger, and dishonesty during a corporate investigation. Your final paycheck is in the envelope. Your credentials will be deactivated before you leave this building. A security officer will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings. Jessica stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Fired. After 8 years. It was happening so fast. "Please, don't do this," she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "It was one mistake, a terrible mistake. I can change. I can take a training course." "This wasn't one mistake," Robert Vance cut in his voice, unforgiving. "This was a pattern. We have the files. You have been doing this for years, flying just under the radar. You just finally did it to someone who had the power to turn on all the lights. The culture of this airline is my responsibility, and you are the symptom of a disease I intend to eradicate. There are no second chances for this." The hard karma Serafina and Vance had planned went far beyond a simple termination. As Jessica was escorted from the building, a shell-shocked wreck, a company-wide memo was being drafted. It wouldn't name her, but it would detail an incident of profound service failure at the highest level, and announce a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of customer service and anti-bias training, mandatory for every single employee, from baggage handlers to the CEO. Michael Petroff, the kind junior attendant, was summoned to headquarters the next day. Expecting a reprimand for not controlling his senior colleague, he was instead met by Serafina Hayes herself. She promoted him to flight purser on the spot, with a significant raise telling him, "Your kindness was the only thing that night that gave me hope for this company. I don't reward protocol, I reward character." David Chen received a personal call from Serafina thanking him for his courage. His corporate account with AuraWing was given a permanent top-tier status, and a significant donation was made in his company's name to a charity of his choice. For Jessica, the landing was brutal. She was fired with cause making it nearly impossible to claim unemployment benefits. News in the tight-knit airline industry travels fast. While her name wasn't mentioned in the public-facing statements, the internal story, the flight attendant who refused to serve her own billionaire boss, leaked and became a cautionary tale whispered in galleys and crew lounges across the country. When she applied for positions at other major airlines, she found doors mysteriously closed. A background check would reveal her termination for gross misconduct. No recruiter wanted to take a chance on that liability. The glamorous career she had built her identity around was gone. Within 6 months, she was forced to give up her apartment. The sharp suits were sold for rent money. The life she had lorded over others was snatched away, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her own prejudice. She ended up working at a rental car kiosk at a regional airport, forced to watch the planes she could no longer fly take off and land, a bitter earthbound reminder of the height from which she had fallen. Months later, Serafina Hayes stood before a graduating class of new AuraWing flight attendants. The new training program was named the Hayes Standard. "Never forget," she told the bright, hopeful faces, "that you are the soul of this airline. The planes are just metal. The seats are just leather. You are the experience. Treat the person in seat 34B with the same grace and respect as the person in 1A. See the person, not the ticket, because you never ever know who you're flying with. But more importantly, it should never, ever matter." The airline flourished under her leadership, becoming the gold standard for service, not because of its luxury, but because of its humanity. Serafina had proven that the best business model was one built on a simple, unbreakable rule. Dignity is non-negotiable, both at 35,000 feet and on the ground. 2 years had passed. The name Jessica Miller was now nothing more than a ghost in the halls of AuraWing Airlines, a cautionary tale for new recruits, though the specifics were known only to a few. The airline itself had transformed. The Hayes Standard was a triumph leading to record-high customer satisfaction scores and industry awards. Serafina Hayes had successfully infused her vision into the company's DNA. Jessica's life, meanwhile, had been stripped of all its former glamour. Her world was no longer Paris layovers and the scent of Chanel No. 5 in a pressurized cabin. It was the smell of stale coffee and industrial air freshener in the consolidated rental car center of the Albany International Airport. Her sharp navy suit had been replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting polyester polo shirt with the logo of Go-Go Rentals stitched on the breast. Her once perfect manicure was now practical and short. The arrogant, judgmental glint in her eyes had been replaced by a permanent, weary resignation. She worked the counter. Day in and day out, she processed reservations for tired business travelers and excited families, forcing a smile as she upsold them on insurance packages she couldn't afford herself. She had learned a brutal form of humility. Here she was, invisible, a functional part of someone else's journey. She was the person people looked through the person they became impatient with. She was in a cruel twist of fate, in a position where her only value was the service she provided to strangers. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the slow period between the morning rush and the evening arrivals. Jessica was mechanically cleaning her keyboard when a man in a well-tailored grey suit approached the counter looking at his phone. "Reservation for Chen," he said, without looking up. Jessica's fingers froze over the keys. The name sent a jolt of ice water through her veins. It couldn't be. Not here. Not in Albany. With trembling hands, she typed the name into the system. The reservation appeared. David Chen. Corporate account, Omnicap Financial. Her breath caught in her throat. She slowly raised her eyes from the screen. He was still looking at his phone, oblivious. It was him. His hair had a little more silver at the temples, but it was unmistakably the man from Seat 2B, the man who had witnessed her downfall, the man whose testimony had been the nail in her professional coffin. A wave of pure, sickening panic washed over her. She wanted to run to hide in the break room, to become ill, but she was trapped. There was no one else at the counter. She had to process the rental. Keeping her head down, her face shielded by her hair, she began the process, her voice a near whisper. "I have you down for a full-size sedan, Mr. Chen. I just need to see your driver's license and the credit card you booked with." He placed the items on the counter, still distracted by an email. As she took them, her trembling fingers brushed against his. She flinched. She processed the payment, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every second felt like an hour. She just needed to get the keys in his hand and get him out the door. "If you could just sign here, please," she mumbled, pushing the electronic keypad toward him. This was the moment. To sign, he had to look up from his phone. David Chen glanced up, his pen poised over the screen. His eyes met hers. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. She was just a face behind a counter. Then a flicker of confusion crossed his features, followed by the slow, unmistakable dawn of recognition. His polite, businesslike smile vanished. "Jessica," he asked, his voice low, not with anger but with stunned surprise. "Jessica Miller." The name spoken aloud by him in this place shattered her fragile composure. There was nowhere to hide. She could only nod a single pathetic gesture. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She expected him to gloat, to lecture her, to call her out for what she had done. She braced for the impact of his anger, but it never came. David Chen simply stood there for a long moment, taking in the scene. He saw her cheap uniform, her tired eyes, the name tag that read, "Jess." He saw the profound, humiliating distance between the powerful, sneering woman on the airplane and the broken person standing before him. He finished signing the keypad and pushed it back toward her. He looked her in the eye, and his expression was one of complex, quiet pity. There was no victory in it. "I hope," he said, his voice soft but firm, "that you are treating your customers here with the dignity they deserve." It was not a question. It was a statement of a lesson he assumed life had brutally taught her. He took the keys from her numb fingers, picked up his briefcase, and turned to walk away. He didn't look back. Jessica stood motionless behind the counter, tears now silently tracing paths down her cheeks. The encounter was worse than any shouting match could have been. His calm, quiet acknowledgement of her fall was a final, devastating verdict. There was no anger left in him, only the memory of a lesson learned and a life that had moved on. His life had continued its upward trajectory. Hers had plummeted back to earth. She watched him walk out into the parking garage, a symbol of the world she had been ejected from. The karma hadn't just been losing her job. It was this. It was being forced to face her past in the wreckage of her present. Wiping her eyes on the sleeve of her polyester shirt, she took a deep, shuddering breath and turned to face the next person in line. "Welcome to Go-Go Rentals," she said, her voice hoarse. "How can I help you today?" And that's the story of Jessica Miller and the flight that cost her everything. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals or their superiors, but how they treat those they believe have no power. Jessica thought she was dealing with a nobody, but she was confronted by the ultimate somebody, and the karma was as swift as it was severe. What do you think? Was this karma served perfectly, or was it too harsh? Has anything like this ever happened to you while traveling? We want to hear your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of justice satisfying, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps our channel grow. Don't forget to share it with a friend, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of real-life drama and powerful consequences. Thanks for listening, or